1922. Unitas, an open access journal, is the oldest extant multidisciplinary journal in the Philippines. In 1922, the University of Santo Tomas main building was constructed. Considered as one of the historical symbols in UST that also represented the height of civilizational achievement in the Philippines. The main building was not born by itself in the year 1922. The academic journal Unitas was founded in the same year. Through the years, Unitas has been witness to the nation's history, same as its twin, the main building which would be known as the heart of the university. During the so-called peacetime of the interwar years, Unitas has the courage to speak about the urgent issues of the day, as well as from the state-of-the-art in fine scholarly theorizing in the arts and published scholarly articles included on the incubation period of the infection typhoid, a series of articles on the indigenous church, problems of working-class legislation in the Philippines, the socialistic dream, the fine arts and aesthetic pleasure, the Philippines woman and her influence in the future. During the early American period, the same year when Unitas broke into academic publication scene, 3 other journals came into limelight. The Philippine Journal of Science, established in 1906 by the American government, had its interest in scientific research only. The Philippine Agriculturalist and Forester, established in 1911 by UP Los Baños, was founded by the student body of the College of Agriculture and Forestry. The University of the Philippines and its Los Baños branch was similar to college student publication until it developed as an academic journal publication for Philippine agricultural scientists. The Philippine Law Journal, established in 1914 by UP College of Law, was founded by the student-run Law Review affiliated in UP Diliman. The publication was designed as a vital training tool for law students and modeled after the student-edited law reviews of American Law School. In the late 1940s, shortly after World War II, while UST served as an internment camp, Unitas continued in the publication of research and journals, not only about the relevant disciplines, but also on Filipino society, the nation, and in the world. Various multidisciplinary publications were held in Unitas. Some of its examples are in the fields of economics, architecture, and international research series from Indonesia, the Middle East, and India. Today, Unitas has expanded its arena to scholarly international conferences and publications, not just through traditional publication, but also shifted to open access online journals. Unitas will celebrate its centenary in 2022. Looking into the rich history of the journal itself has been made possible by the UST Heritage Library Collections, which has painstakingly scanned all copies of Unitas starting from its very first issue published in July 1922. This was done for the preservation and digitalization of the journals and for the convenient perusal of specialists, scholars, and general readers. As the oldest university-based multidisciplinary journal of its kind in the Philippines and possibly in Asia, Unitas is a rich source of information and insights in understanding various aspects of the history of knowledge production in the Philippines across the disciplines. UNITAS is an international online peer-reviewed open access journal of advanced research in literature, culture, and society, published biannually, May and November, by the University of Santo Tomas.
Good afternoon. This is May Perez, your host, and welcome to the fourth installment of the UNITAS Authors International Lecture Series as opening salvo of the year-long centenary celebration. Yes, you heard it right. UNITAS turns 100 years old this year, having its first publication in 1922. Today's event is in cooperation with Cultural, Literary, and Art Studies Society Incorporated, or CLAS, and Critica Cultura of Ateneo de Manila University, and co-sponsored by the Department of Literature of the University of Santo Tomas, where the UNITAS Journal is housed. We in UNITAS welcome you today for participating in the fourth installment of the Authors International Lecture Series, which is designed as a classroom lecture-style forum of the authors that have been published in UNITAS. As may be gleaned from the introductory video, since the first issue of UNITAS in July 1922, it has expanded the arena of its scholarly, even linguistic conversations with the rest of the world of scholarship. Particularly this time, we are aiming to capture new readers from the ranks of younger scholars, students, and researchers. Under the journal's new initiatives and leadership, UNITAS has moved forward by leaps and bounds. It has transformed from a local, national, to an international scholarly publication, in the process modernizing its concept and format and upgrading it all around as an international journal. Such a transformation befits a journal with an especially long and distinguished history of 100 years, from which one can trace back exciting and illuminating vignettes of the intellectual history of a people. This transformation would not have been possible without the editorial support and scholarly advice of the still expanding international editorial board, consisting of leading international scholars in their specific fields of specialization from Asia to the United States to Europe and South America. Neither would it have been realized without the administrative support and encouragement right from the outset of the UST's rector, the Secretary General, the Dean of the Faculty of Arts and Letters, and the Chair and Faculty of the Literature Department in the last years, but most especially its staff members. We in UST know that there is no UNITAS as we know it now without the unwavering commitment and single-minded vision of the journal's new editor-in-chief, who has been the guiding light of UNITAS and dynamic scholar in residence of UST based in the Faculty of Arts and Letters, who is none other than Professor Maria Luisa Torres Reyes. Today, UNITAS is known worldwide through its issues, which are published online and open access, and its active membership in a national and international network of scholars and professional organizations through the initiative of the editor-in-chief. Wherever in the world she travels, she proudly carries the UNITAS banner as she had carried the banner of Ateneo's Critica Cultura in another life and continues to do so as KK's editor emerita. Under her leadership, the centennial year celebration in 2022 will be highlighted by several milestones, namely, number one, the publication of the special centennial issue for which contributions will be exclusive to the members of the International Board and which will be released in July. Two, a pre-inaugural assembly by UNITAS and the scholar in residence of the Network of Journals in Asia, which will be called Asian Journals Network, or AJN, whose founding members are the editors and staff members of academic journals from the Philippines, Indonesia, Japan, China, Korea, and Taiwan in August, while the inaugural assembly is set in April 2023. And the last, the digitalization of all UNITAS issues from 1922 to 2022, complete with abstracts and keywords, which will be our gift to the loyal readers and worldwide by way of providing them the convenience of a scholar-friendly archival research. You are all, of course, invited to all these activities. To cap off UNITAS Authors International Lecture Series is this afternoon's lecture titled Dictatorships, Temporal Edifice, Ang Bagong Lipunan's Manila International Airport. The abstract reads that this study analyzes the Manila International Airport, or MIA, currently known as the Ninoy Aquino International Airport, or NAIA, and how the Marcos regime utilized the airport to propel Ang Bagong Lipunan's directives and how it affected the families of the biggest users of the airport, the Filipino Overseas Contract Workers, or OCWs. The study asserts that the MIA produces a space that is both consistent and inconsistent with the salient features of the Bahay Kubo, or known in English as Nipa Hut. This connects the family rhetoric of the Marcoses, Ang Bagong Lipunan, and the experiences of the OCWs inside the airport through an architectonics of contradiction and excess. By the simplicity and complexity of the hut, or should I say, by extending Prezosi's concept of houseless and how it relates to the simplicity and complexity of the hut, and by supplementing the concept with Lefebvre's spatial triad, I posit that this reproduction of airport space augments a nationalism that Ang Bagong Lipunan purports, associating self-sacrifice for the common good of the nation and the state that ultimately legitimizes a national narrative and cultural memory, both fantasized and constructed. This afternoon's speaker is Juan Miguel Leandro Quizon. He specializes in comparative Southeast Asian cultural studies. He received his MA in Literary and Cultural Studies from the Ateneo de Manila University in 2017. Before leaving for further studies, he was an assistant professorial lecturer at the Department of Literature, College of Liberal Arts of De La Salle University, Manila. He was a research fellow in 2015 at the Asia Graduate Student Fellowship under the Asia Research Institute at the National University of Singapore. He is currently finishing his PhD in Cultural Studies at the Chinese University of Hong Kong under the Postgraduate Studentship Scheme. Without much ado, ladies and gentlemen, let us all welcome our esteemed speaker, Juan Miguel Leandro Quizon.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Ms. May, for that artful introduction. I hope that everyone is doing well. First of all, I would like to thank UNITAS for inviting me for your Authors International Lecture Series. Presentation, please. Okay. Yes, first slide, please. So for this afternoon, I would like to divide my presentation into three. First, we will talk about the perceived space. Wherein I'm going to talk about the historical background of the airport and its function and how it purpose became an edifice of the regime. The next one is the conceived space, wherein I'm going to discuss its physical layout and how it connects to the original modernization of the Nipahat. And lastly, the lived narratives and the lived experiences of the OCWs, which, as mentioned before, are the biggest users of the said airport. So we're going to talk about their plights, the challenges of how it is to become an OCW. Next slide, please. The project started after I've read Gerard Lico's germinal book entitled Edifice Complex, Power, Myth, and Marcos State Architecture, wherein he explores the historical narratives via criticism of the architectural structures built within the cultural center of the Philippines. This is the prime location where Ferdinand and Imelda Marcos's shared edifice complex was structurally manifested. Lico deploys and situates his architectural criticism within the context of Marcos's dictatorship that redirected foreign aid funding while appropriating architecture or architects like Leandro Locsin, Francisco Mañosa, and Froilan Hong. These ostentatious edifices, most of which are still functional until today, are residues of the conjugal dictatorship's vision of a new world order, Ang Bagong Lipunan. So in this presentation, I want to analyze the Manila International Airport. It's currently known as the Ninoy Aquino International Airport, and how the regime actually utilized this said structure to propel Ang Bagong Lipunan's directives, and of course, how it affected the biggest users, which are the OCWs. I posit that this kind of reproduction of airport space augments a kind of nationalism that Ang Bagong Lipunan wanted. You know, it associated self-sacrifice for the common good of the nation and the state, which legitimizes national narrative and cultural memory, which is both fantasized and constructed. The value of an airport, we'll now talk about the airport, the value of an airport in relation to a country's economic and financial status cannot be stressed enough. These colossal projects also mirror the nation's international relations, not just within its immediate region, but throughout global aviation conglomerates and alliances. The Manila International Airport occupies the cities of Pasay and Parañaque. The iconic airport is located at the southern corner of the National Capital Region of Metro Manila, and it shares an interminable history of air travel and service to the central urban region and its neighboring provinces. In September 1961, the modern terminal of the new Manila International Airport began its operation and eventually opened its halls to the public. The inauguration of the new terminal signaled the beginning of the jet age in the Philippines, quote unquote. Architect Federico Illustre's design for the new terminal was considered internationally fashionable and trendy during those years. Illustre's design of the MIA proved to be relatively more extensive and spacious as compared to its congested and narrow predecessor. However, due to an unfortunate circumstance, this illusory impression lasted only for a few years. In 1972, a great fire ravaged and destroyed a huge portion of the old terminal. Hence, a new one was built under the auspices of the state, assigning architect Leandro Locsin to design a new edifice for the regime. Ferdinand Marcos ordered the development and improvement of the MIA to cater to the aviation needs of the next generation. Hence, Locsin used his original concept of a modernized bahay kubo for the new airport terminal that follow the edifices of Ang Bagong Lipunan consistently under the aegis and directions of Imelda Marcos, which is to modernize the Filipino architectural vernacular. You can see the similarities of designs when it comes to CCP, the Folk Arts Theater, the Manila Film Center. Okay, the act of designing and erecting international airports became an opportunity for developing countries to produce a blank canvas for national governments, architectural companies, urban planning firms, and other vital stakeholders to deliberately craft and design and the funding of these airports based on dominant design sensibilities and cultural tastes. International airports became the modern palette to exhibit political grandeur, all in the name of the state. Hence, given these considerations, airport projects eventually became some of the most celebrated civil work projects of all time. The first couple, Ferdinand and Imelda Marcos, were well aware of these economic, political, and cultural realities. The establishment of Ang Bagong Lipunan articulated these visions of the Marcoses. With the declaration of martial law in 1972, Marcos unpacked various machineries for authoritarian control, including the exploitation of the family rhetoric in an attempt to remake the Philippines into his image of a new society. At the height of the Marcoses' forceful inculcation of their ideologies, they created cultural institutions, organizations, and various programs in order to lay down solid foundations of Ang Bagong Lipunan. But their imbalanced perspective and narrative by way of Ang Bagong Lipunan has led to several flaws in the design narratives of the regime's edifices, which includes the Manila International Airport. Next slide, please. Anywhere, an airport becomes a cultural showcase for passengers given the privilege to navigate and traverse the halls, gates, and lounges inside the structure. International airports also become a palette where the state's grandeur is supposed to be exhibited. So, in a way, these construction projects of airports engender considerable civic pride and are hence objects of municipal and regional prestige. Imelda Marcos wanted to invest and take advantage of this project because, in a sense, the new airport becomes a city inside an architectural structure, even a representation of the country. Again, it reveals a certain level of architectonics of excess, in a sense that an airport holds a microcosm of the city inside it. In the case of Mia, the grand vision of the Marcoses establishes the context of this specific built space. However, its architectonics of contradiction and excess reflect how particular features of the Mia both reproduce and counter its original template, which is the Bahay Kubo. Leandro Locsin's modernized Bahay Kubo design, as applied in the new terminal construction of the Manila International Airport, boasted of a level of grandeur and elegance supposedly befitting of the regime's vision for the nation, an economic and political power that will eventually be noticeable in the global stage for architectural feats, supposedly. Okay? From an aerial perspective, so here's a picture. From an aerial perspective, the terminal looks like a funnel. Locsin's design of the Manila International Airport terminal adheres to the classical architectural pronouncement, function follows form. And this becomes an important characteristic of the design because it ultimately functions like a funnel that leads passengers from the main departure and arrival halls into the respective departure and arrival gates. Moreover, from the air side, it looks like as if it is collecting the aircrafts arriving from the tarmac. One vital function of an airport is to welcome visitors. Its wide conical mouth from both sides depicts openness. This specific feature of openness is consistent with the Bahay Kubo. From the onset, the native Bahay Kubo reflects this feature of openness in two ways: its structural design and how it echoes Filipino openness to other people. However, this funnel design presents a drawback in terms of constricting flows, the concept of the bottleneck. This piped narrow stem leading to both mouths function as a controlled area or controlled areas for channeling and filtering. Such reticence departs from the Bahay Kubo feature of the airport. From the outside, the design reflects openness and spaciousness, but once departing passengers clear their check-in formalities, they are channeled through immigration and security checks where such controlled bottlenecks happen. Moreover, labyrinth-like interior follows the security check. Next slide, please. As if traversing through a maze of novelty and gift shops, tributaries then lead to different gates for boarding. It is also true upon arrival. Two wide, almost hugging limbs welcome passengers with such openness. Upon disembarkation, passengers go through tight directed halls for immigration, baggage collection, and customs. These processes of channeling and filtration follow the functionality of the funnel. Such functionalism, though, deviates from the Bahay Kubo concept. The constricted hallways and low elevation in areas in between the departure halls and boarding gates makes the interior of the airport disorienting and harrowing. The Bahay Kubo's important feature includes the complementary relationship of spaciousness and openness. Such concepts may be further discussed in terms of the Filipino notion of aliwalas. It is used to describe a space that is clean, open, and pleasant. But the idea of spaciousness that Locsin wanted was that of awe and magnificence, and yet discounting the previous conventions. In a way, this could also augment its excessiveness, dysfunctional spaciousness. On the onset, the MIA promises both features, but its interior space speak differently. Next slide, please. In Preciosi's book entitled The Semiotics of the Built Environment, he posits that architectonic objects function territorially by staging behavioral routines or episodes, framing interpersonal interactions, and dividing, structuring, delimiting, or zoning environment. However, the case of the MIA is different in a way that zoning is made unique because of the politics of passenger presence. For instance, a huge percentage of passengers are the overseas Filipino workers, which from this point on, I will utilize their earlier categories as overseas contract workers or OCWs coming from Marcos himself. The article expands Preciosi's arguments by showing how, for instance, special lanes and zones for OCWs functions now as spaces of abuse. For some passengers, aside from the OCWs, the airport space is merely a transition from one place to another, from one border to the next. However, based on the experiences and narratives of OCWs, it becomes a jump-off point to a better life given their social and economic status. These formations articulate social topology that is produced and reproduced inside the MIA. But what is interesting here is that this site where the family is first dispersed also becomes the first space where OFWs and OCWs experience a lot of abuse. This from immigration to customs A lot of scandalous issues have been thrown, of things that are happening, anomalous things that are happening inside the airport. That's why sometimes I look into these signages saying OFW lanes or OCW lanes, wherein we are meant to believe that, oh, it's a special lane for the OFWs, but then it becomes an object or a tool for people inside the airport, for instance, to know specifically who to target, right? Who to target as their victims. Next slide, please. Airports are always packed during the Christmas holidays because it is a time dedicated for the family. For the MIA, now officially called NAIA, its arrivals hall becomes a witness to a multitude of homecomings. Even commercials, product promotions, and advertisements focus on the plurality of homecomings via the airport. Just to give an example, commercials from Uber, Maxis, and Globe Communication. Still grounded on the narrative of the family, these commercials depict the arrival halls as the immediate nexus of home, both in its national and familial sense. It becomes the first interface with the motherland, and it is where families wait for the one returning. More often than not, these commercials depict OFWs or OCWs returning home to spend Christmas with the family. However, what is not highlighted in these commercials is the fact that even before OCWs get to the arrival halls to experience their return, the country already welcomed them through confusion inside a constricted building, corruption from immigration and customs officers, mismanagement of archaic machines, and the outdated terminal complex itself. And from what I mentioned before, these specialized lanes supposed to be for special treatment, in reality, these lanes are installed to make it easier for officers to know who to harass and take advantage of. Which in a sense, these are all symptoms of a larger narrative of corruption and manipulation that disillusioned our nation. I remember looking into other cognates of the Bahay Kubo and structure of the Bahay Kubo. I think about it as our Filipino concept of the bayanihan, for instance. No? Binubuhat ng mga kapitbahay ang isang bahay kubo. They help their neighbor transport yung bahay kubo from one space to the next. It shows unity, brotherhood sa ordinary folks, with ordinary folks. But if you change the notion, or if you change the depiction of the Bahay Kubo into what the Marcoses wanted to become, castle-like, ostentatious, grandiose structures, kapag ito ay binuhat ng mga ordinaryong mamamayan, ito ay napakabigat. And I think that is what is happening with the OCWs and the OFWs. OCWs from way back, they have helped the nation economically, and from the time of the Marcoses, they already know how much the OFWs contribute to the nation through their remittances. We even baptized them, or we call them as modern day heroes. But if you look at it, if we read and watch through the challenges faced by our OFWs, ganun ba ang dapat na trato natin sa kanila kung talagang ang tingin natin sa kanila ay mga bayani? And if we look at it, no, kapag inisip natin, what is one thing that could best represent an object that could best represent OFWs? One of the best objects that could represent them for me is the balikbayan box. And I've read this poem saying that the penultimate balikbayan box that would return to the family is the coffin of the beloved OFW abroad. And it still happens nowadays, di ba? Parang statistics would say ilang katawan ng mga OFWs ang bumabalik sa ating bansa kada araw. Marcos created these offices and government sectors to supposedly take care of the rights and consider the plights of our migrant workers. But up until now, nakikita pa rin natin na konting-konti lang ang percentage na pinapakinggan sila. The eventual return of OCWs abroad reflects how this cycle of departure and arrival becomes a perpetual means for supporting a government that heavily relies on the remittances but neglects to prioritize the improvement of the welfare of the OCWs. Moreover, the abuses directed towards the so-called modern-day heroes inside the airport continue to haunt our migrant workers both upon departure and upon arrival. Ultimately, the space of the airport functions as an enabler of a particular kind of spatial interrogation. In this case, the contractual nature and even the contractual nature of their bodies that binds them to a structure of injustice and exploitation in a space that was built as an homage to the Filipino home. MIA functioned not just a gateway for foreign and international visitors and dignitaries to get a taste of the city of man, but also solidified the edifice complex of the regime. It became a getaway or gateway for Filipinos to render service elsewhere. It became a tool for sending out Filipino citizens to other countries, leaving a lot of families here in the Philippines hollow. Kasi meron at merong nawawala sa konsepto ng pamilya kapag mayroong umaalis, right? It became a tool for sending out Filipino citizens to other countries, which bolstered the overseas contract workers phenomena. The airport ensured continuity of ideals propelled by the Marcoses. The narrative of these architectures, specifically the Manila International Airport, meant to instigate a kind of nationalism that purports and ultimately associate self-sacrifice for the common good of the nation and the state. According to Lico, this myth creates a unified image that gives tangibility to the promise of a national architecture and imagination of a nation. In the Lefebvrean sense, the MIA idealized the excesses of the authoritarian regime of the Marcos. In terms of purpose and context, the excesses came indirectly by way of imagining and reimagining the public structure as a gateway to the city of man and what it represents. The City of Man, a project launched by Imelda Marcos as the first governor of Metro Manila, was a rebranding campaign that aimed to reshape the capital of the Philippines. Even if all these magnificent structures are still here today, even if there's a physicalization of that vision, at the end of the day, sino nga ba ang tunay na nakinabang dito? Nakinabang ba ang ordinaryong mamamayan dito? And I think it's high time, even if the process started, I think it's high time for us to reclaim properly these structures, these spaces, na supposedly sa atin naman talaga bilang mga ordinaryong mamamayan. The Bahay Kubo, a symbol that welcomes and champions the vernacular culture of the country, monumentalized the modernistic inflection and cultural showcase of the regime. However, it only does so to an extent that benefits the elite. The airport reflects an openness that is constricting. The openness established by the funnel-shaped structure of the terminal achieves its promise only until the departure hall. Anywhere else inside the terminal, the elevation becomes slower and more constricting, as I've mentioned. Moreover, the number of passengers passing through immigration, security check, baggage claims, customs and arrivals hall causes a sense of compression and tightening. MIA functioned not just a gateway, but it became a tool, no, for sending out Filipino citizens abroad. So in another Liffeverian sense, the Marcosian architectonic represents a certain kind of spatial practice, the perceived notions that bring about patterns inside the respective physical space. The airport, as conclusion, the airport, particularly its interior calibration of space, embraces the production and reproduction of what was conceived. The airport ensured continuity of ideals propelled by the Marcoses. The narrative of these architectural edifices of the regime, specifically the Manila International Airport, was meant to instigate a kind of nationalism that the Marcoses wanted. No? This myth creates a unified image that gives tangibility to the promise of a national architecture and imagination of a nation. Through public state-initiated architectural structures, I believe that the regime continually played out a national narrative and cultural memory that was both fantasized and constructed based on how they wanted it to be. And that, for me, should still be very questionable. Thank you and good afternoon.
All right. Thank you so much, Sir Quizon, for your pertinent discussion as regards how the utilization of space and the creation of architectural structures direct the ways how the narrative of an authoritarian state is conveyed to the people and to spark nationalism. We now come to the open forum so as to engage our audience into this conversation about the Marcos dictatorship and one of its political mechanisms, Ang Bagong Lipunan, a vehicle actually for social engineering. Please be reminded to key in your questions or remarks at the comment section. Now, let's have questions coming from the audience. Okay, so there is one question that is sent. This is a student of political science. Okay, what aspects of these architectural structures effectively deploy the authoritarian government's political messaging regarding, for instance, family, economic opportunities, solidarity, and nationalism?
Okay. Siguro, with this project kasi, I focused on the rhetoric of family. So if for instance, we're going to create a thread dun sa perceived, conceived, and live, how did they use the rhetoric of family? Nagsimula sila sa conjugal dictatorship, di ba? Parang, I remember Imelda and Ferdinand Marcos, they made a spectacle out of their relationship, which made it very popular with the masses. So ginamit nila yon. Ferdinand Marcos used Imelda Marcos. Imelda Marcos used Ferdinand Marcos, and they constructed this imaginary that they are They use this imaginary that they are the father and the mother of the nation, diba? Gusto nila na yun ang konsepto nila ng ng pamilya. But how did they demonize it? Through cronyism and oligarchy. Sorry. There. Oligarchy and cronyism. And with architecture, with structures, ginamit nila yung konsepto o binenta nila yung konsepto ng tahanan when Imelda Marcos directed these architects to use to modernize this vernacular vision of the bahay kubo. Pero yun nga, kapag nakita natin, hindi na siya yung alam nating konsepto ng bahay kubo, openness, simplicity, function. It wanted to follow yung gusto ng regime, ostentatious, grand, to the level that it becomes unnecessary, or kung sasabihin natin na nagagamit naman yan pero sino ba yung tunay na nakinabang, or kahit na inutang yang mga yan, the big chunk of these debts that were created, kanino ba napunta, right? And I think if it's from the government, they owe it to the people for these structures to happen. So again, yung concept naman ng paano na-demonize yung rhetoric ng family is itong sa architectural structures naman, na parang instead of it being simple, instead of it being functional, it only nagamit lang to mostly by the elite. And then the last one for the OCWs naman, yung pangako na mas magiging maganda ang buhay ng bawat Pilipino. If you read through migrant OFW literature, lagi nagsisimula dyan yung pagkasira ng mga pamilya. I mean, this is not always the case, but if you read through a lot of OFW literatures, that's almost always the central concern. Nasisira yung pamilya. And what's worse is, as I've mentioned in my presentation, namamatayan tayo ng mga OFWs. So again, yung mga pangako na naman na yan, So I think it has something to do with yung ang laki-laki nung pangako, pero sino lang ang naka-experience ng pangakong yon? Selected people. And what happens to the ordinary citizen? We are still carrying most of the burden that was left by the regime.
Yeah, right. So as far as we understand your lecture, that the Marcoses really just wanted to project to the nation, using these edifices, these structures that they built to what? To show or to create that myth, to create that myth about themselves, about, the country, that, this country is enjoying actually the grandeur, the power, and so-called idealism, hence the so-called Ang Bagong Lipunan, and even actually crafting this, which until now is being believed by a lot of apologists and I would say loyalists about the so-called golden age, of the Marcos regime. So now it's that now we are now able to understand how the use of space, and the creation of these architectural structures help, or should I say, strengthen the political narrative, as a means of, as the way of mechanism to, to convey their, should I say that? To convey what they want the Filipino to believe, and which actually, these are all not true. As you have said, only the selected few enjoyed, the successes, the excesses, no, the so-called economic stability. Now, can you just explain a bit how these architectural structures are actually sites of memory, sites of memory erected by the Marcoses for them to be remembered when they are no longer in power?
That's a good question, Miss May. Let's begin with what you mentioned. No, one important trope and theme that the conjugal dictatorship really utilized to the max is spectacle. No, everything has to be spectacular from different art forms, so from architecture, yung mga para-parada, all of these events, just to, alam mo yun, just to blind, I guess, the citizenry, without actually, but if you try to weave through, no, kung talagang hihimayin mo, sandali, kumusta ba ang economic standing natin? Kumusta ang ordinaryong Pilipino? Oo, nag-e-enjoy sa mga nag-e-enjoy sa mga sa musika o sa mga parada, but at the end of the day, are they living a better life after it? When we are talking about this golden age for who?
Yes.
Diba? That is always a pertinent question.
The cronies.
Golden age nga tong mga to, o kung golden age nga ito, kaninong golden age ito? Siyempre, dun sa mga, sa mga pamilya na selected few. On your question on sites of memory, that is true. These architectural structures, yung CCP, yung PICC, yung film center, yung LRT, yung MRT, all these health centers. Makikita mo yan, no? Hanggang ngayon ginagamit yan.
Yes.
As pangontra, parang sige, kung anti-Marcos kayo, wag niyong gamitin, which is problematic because that was those structures were created for the people, no? And at the same time,
that were used to construct these structures came from the people's money, from taxes, right?
Or kung uutang man sa ibang bansa, ang magbabayad ay
people.
Ang
paying for these taxes.
Yeah. So when it comes to memory, no, even in memory, siguro maganda i-qualify natin siya, no? Not simply memory but trauma, no? Kasi 'di ba a specific subsection of memory studies, for instance, is trauma studies, and I think I want to qualify that it's a certain kind of trauma. For instance, yun lang sa Manila Film Center,
yes,
no?
That building,
because of the vision of this one person, yung mga namatay, the workers, and you know what? The workers, they did not need to die. But if you look into how these architectural structures were constructed, yung 24/7, 3 shifts, and then Imelda Marcos would visit at any given time just to make sure that the workers are yes,
time for the film festival, right?
And yung folk arts theater, for instance.
Yes. And when the tragedy struck, the bodies were not even accounted for because they had to work.
Yeah.
So
parang
finish it.
For me, Miss May, this consistency of pagbabaliwala sa mga buhay ng mga ordinaryong mamamayan is still consistent sa narrative nila. Ilang OFWs ang namamatay ng panahon nila, wala pa rin. But, others may argue, bakit yung mga ibang government administrations, they also neglected OFWs, the plight of the OFWs. But what I'm saying is that it was during the time of Marcos wherein we had a 672% increase of OFWs. And this was because we experienced, I think, the highest level of unemployment and underemployment. And nung panahon niya yung natakot siya, napraning siya na baka itong mga unemployed na tao ay sumama sa mga anti-Marcos. So, sige.
You joined the underground government movements at that time.
Yeah, so sige, paalisin na lang din natin sila para nakakapag-tax na, nakakapag-remittance pa.
So we really see these edifices as mere projections of what they wanted to create for the people, what they wanted for the people to believe, this myth, no, about the Marcoses, the elegance, the grandeur, the power, the golden age. And sadly, even until now, many people do not actually see the truth, no? But I think media censorship played the role in that. Why these things, these stuffs were not broadcast or were not written down, should I say, were not really made all out, no, to the public to know. So meaning they were, put under the rug, even now, right? So that's why we say that your paper, no, your lecture, and I hope that this could be expanded, right? But in your case, it's the architecture, the space, very, very relevant, really, especially now, that these things about the Marcoses are coming up again because of the upcoming elections, So just mere projections, how the use of space and the architecture is used to convey to the people what they want the people to believe, even if it's not true at all. Right. Okay. Now, there's another one question here. No, it's we consider the Marcos dictatorship, his regime as a fascist regime, right? So, and we can observe that the principles of rationality. Well, on the other hand, the principles of aesthetic purity and beauty. So, this for all its contradictions, because fascist has started to be, or should I say fascist art, has started to be an extension of the fascist propaganda, propaganda to glorify the regime. So if you imagine a spectrum, which end of the spectrum might you consider the architectural construction and aesthetic of dictatorships architecture to belong? The rational or the aesthetic? Yeah, considering this fascist art, which is used for propaganda.
For me, it's all show. It's all show. Even their promise of what it's supposed to look like, even how it should function. It failed in so many levels. That's why I think I'm sticking with my answer that it's all aesthetics. It's all aesthetics that would contribute to how they want to manipulate ang sambayanan, di ba? If you're saying that it's meant to cater to the ordinary Filipinos, how did it actually cater to the ordinary Filipinos? For instance, if you look at CCP then, di ba? Even its structure, if you're going to look at it when it was new, with its huge ramp, you would have to have a car and a driver for you to be able to go and to see performances inside the CCP. But what I'm saying is that we should also be hopeful, and we can counter these traumas that happen. For instance, CCP, di ba? Sinasabi elite ang mga ang gumagamit siya, but there is a way to reclaim these spaces, and I am hopeful that Filipinos would start to realize that we have to reclaim these spaces, because if they promise that it is for the Filipinos, then we should reclaim them. Yeah. We should reclaim these spaces. For instance, parang tuwang-tuwa ako kapag napapadaan ako sa harap ng CCP, for instance, and I see people na ginagamit yung ramp, nagja-jogging, like an ordinary person using the space to do just about anything, no? Mga ordinary things that an ordinary citizen can do. I think is one kind of reclamation on how to reclaim these spaces to be ours. O kaya yung pag-show ng mga plays or dramatic pieces that are critical of the dictatorship. No?
Yeah. That these say exhibits perhaps, or even plays that can be considered as counter narratives of the of the political narratives of the dictatorship. That could be really one way of reclaiming these structures. No, that these are actually traumatic. No, not really symbols of not just power, but that is really symbols of elegance and grandeur and excesses. But these are actually symbols of trauma, of suffering, of plunder, of corruption, and of course the human rights abuses and atrocities during the regime. Yeah, that really is the hope, that these structures would remind them. So there is another question, by the way. Specifying the kind of art, isn't it ironic that the design philosophy used by Marcos is brutalist? Brutalist. It's like on the outside, it looks like brutalist, and on the inside, a brutal treatment to our, of course, the Filipino workers abroad.
Yeah. Diba? It's hindi natin alam kung sinadya ba ito, but yeah, I agree. The kind of modernistic design that CCP, Manila International Airport, the specific design, the specific modern design that they use is called the movement is brutalism, no? So 2 levels bigla. One is brutalism yan. Kasi you know what aspects of brutalism, no? Parang concrete, solid, ganyan. But on the inside also, yes,
it is indeed.
No, it is indeed brutal. And this is one of the things that I don't know, frustrates me right now. People can easily shrug off these atrocities, all in the name of let's move on, let's forgive.
Yeah.
When Miss May, you already opened this can of worms, no, with our current election. Parang ang narrative ngayon is, alam nyo, sama-sama na lang tayo, mag-move on na lang tayo, para kalimutan na lang natin. But the question is, who are you to say that we can move on from these atrocities, especially if you're not the one who lost a loved one from these atrocities?
Actually, yes.
Go ahead.
Remember, that was really said publicly by Amy Marcos years ago, and now it's being used by the apologists, by the loyalists, the followers. Now, let's just move on. Kalimutan natin. It's in the past. But how can you really move on if the perpetrators themselves keep on denying, there is no acceptance on their part that these atrocities actually happened, when there have been witnesses and there are actually historical records and even court decisions that say so. So, there can be no moving on if there is no, number one, acceptance, right? And there is no justice at all. As you have said a while ago, yes, these family members whose fathers, brothers, sisters, or even mothers, they have not returned. The desaparecidos, they're mourning. There is no place for mourning because the body have not been seen.
Exactly.
Have not been recovered. So where will they go? Where is that side of mourning? So would they pray for the dead, but they're not sure if these are dead? So, the dilemma, the pain, but they assume that they are dead because they have been back for decades.
Mm-hmm.
So that's really number one.
Yeah. Can I
Yes,
add to
please.
that? I remember of narratives no, na parang for instance yung mga desaparecidos. Yung mga nawawala.
Yes.
Ang ganda nung hindi maganda. I don't want to romanticize it, pero it's chilling to look into the concept of ang mga nawawala. Kasi hindi mo sinasabing patay na sila. But you know, how can you start moving on? How can you start with your mourning period? How can you start with accepting what has happened? Kung ikaw mismo, for instance, as a parent, basta na lang nawala ang iyong mga anak. And you as a parent, 'di ba, parang it's parang tinatraidor mo sila if you give up na buhay pa sila. 'Di ba? That's why this kind of hoping that their sons, their grandsons are still alive, kaya hindi pa talaga makakapag-move on yung mga yan because they haven't even started mourning.
Yes.
'Di ba? And it's been how many years, and ang sakit siguro na makita na eto na naman sila. Here we go again. And you mentioned accountability, acceptance and justice, but also accountability. 'Di ba? You have to be accountable of all these atrocities. Ginagamit yung the sins of the father should not be the sins of the sons, but nasa ang accountability doon. And if you're going to support that kind of leadership na hindi accountable, parang dangerous waters na naman tayo.
Yeah. So, the accountability, but the fact remains that they will never really accept responsibility or accountability of these violence and atrocities because these infrastructures, these edifices remain to be seen as symbols of grandeur, of elegance, of power, of idealism, which they wanted the people to believe. So, and sadly, Filipinos, until now, accept that meaning, that kind of, of symbolism of these art, no? I say, the architecture, I should say. So, really difficult, and that remembering and mourning, these are, well, according to Herman, this psychologist said that is stage 2 of recovery, remembering and mourning. And number 3 is if the victims of violence are able to reintegrate back to society, but if there is the stage of the number 1, there is no acceptance, there is no acknowledgement. No? And even, our government, for example, say in the administration of Duterte, for the longest time, many advocate groups and even professors, the academics, have really denied or say prohibited the burial of Marcos to be in the Libyan ng mga bayani, and then suddenly some sort of a covert agreement, right? And we just found out that, okay, the burial is being done at the moment, okay? And so the body of Marcos is finally laid down to rest in the Libyan ng mga bayani. So again, this stirred, feelings of pain, of anger, right? Again, so again, what we would like to point out is that your study remains to be very relevant, and we hope that we could read more like your study, all right? Because these are examples of counter narratives actually. Although in this case, it's the utilization of space and architecture. Although yes, for some people they would use novels. The basic thing really is to make use of these novels as counter narratives. So very good, very impressive study there, Sir Quizon. Again, we are enlightened definitely about your topic. We are made to realize now, okay, it's not just the literature, but it's also the architecture that can be used as counter narratives of of an authoritarian government's political mechanism. So again, thank you for your edifying lecture and for sharing with us that yes, as I've said, the use of space and creation of architecture are actually political mechanisms that are deployed not just by the Marcoses, but I would say generally by authoritarian governments out there in Asia, most especially. And so we award this certificate of appreciation, which reads Juan Miguel Leandro Quizon, okay, is awarded this certificate of appreciation from the Chinese University of Hong Kong for sharing his knowledge and expertise as the speaker for the fourth installment of the UNITAS Authors International Lecture Series titled Dictatorships, Temporal Edifice, Ang Bagong Lipunan's Manila International Airport, conducted on March 31, 2022. Signed by no other than Professor Maria Luisa Torres Reyes, PhD, Editor-in-Chief, UNITAS, and the President of Cultural, Literary, and Arts Studies Society, Incorporated. Okay, thank you, sir. This lecture series will run from February until April. The fifth installment is scheduled on April 12 to be delivered by Jesus Cyril Conde of Ateneo de Naga University. This lecture will be based on his UNITAS article, Metonymies of Ethnobotany and the Fellowship Discourse of Sagrada Familia Healers in Irosin, Sorsogon, published in volume 94, number 1 of the journal. Again, you are all invited to it. So please watch out for our invitation and for the registration link that will be posted in the UNITAS FB page and which will also be sent to you via email. On this note, UNITAS would like to thank the thousands of viewers who have been with us since last year, since we have installed the UNITAS 100 last year in June, until today. So asking interesting questions, contributing to the discussions with their remarks, or even for just saying, having been there, would like to acknowledge, my friend here, Lizelle Zafra, has been an avid member of the audience since the first lecture series, listening, just being there, listening intently, taking down notes, right? Watching, trying to make this lecture as a related article or related notes for his or her research. So now I would just like to acknowledge our dear Editor-in-Chief and President of Class, Professor Maria Luisa Torres Reyes, for taking the lead in the celebration of the UNITAS centenary, and to our dear staff members, definitely Kim, Francis, Nico, and Honey, for all the work that you do. So again, this has been your host, May Perez. Thank you and good afternoon. So see you again on April 12.